Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Solo Experience. I'm your host, Ryan. It has been a busy week for Sende V. Been doing some stuff and installing some jobs. Haven't had a chance. Oh, I did. I finished Hansel and Gretel. So I did that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Um, Continuing the car escapade that I'm doing with the Garage 21, help teaching special needs people how to work on cars. So that's continuing, but you guys don't care about that. You are here for the AV discussion. Posted in a dedicated thread in the get-togethers, I think, area meetups and get-togethers forum about how the Iowa experience went and my thoughts and my constructive criticism, my likes and dislikes about people's rooms. I always think it's best to provide that information because the last thing you want is for people just to be overtly positive when there's things that you could fix. You always want to know the things that you can make better because sometimes you get, this isn't really a real term, but it's what I'm going to say, ear blind to a particular issue, or even um, sight blind. And we all talk about nose blind, but I hope your room doesn't smell bad. Blind to these certain issues that exist in rooms because you just get used to them. So being able to go into these places and see these things, and you're much more easily going to notice things wrong because you've never been there before. So you pick up on this stuff. You're not used to it. So post it in there. Um, and we're going to talk about our topic, which is audiophile speakers against pro speakers and why that matters and how I think a good part of the industry uses equipment incorrectly. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, let's talk about Hansel and Gretel. So I watched Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunters, at the recommendation of the stream. And I think it wasn't like this is going to be the best movie ever. It was more of this is a fun movie based on what you've been talking about. And the sound was good. It did a lot with Atmos. There was a lot of objects moving around the room. It was not a good movie, but it was not a horrific movie. I think it knew what it was. It knew what it wanted to be, and it knew what it was going to be, which was not a great movie. And nobody really took it too seriously. But I didn't turn it off. So there's that. Uh, it was okay. I'd give it a C, average. I mean, it's not a good movie. It's not a horrific movie. But it wasn't neutral, I guess. It was, I mean, maybe a C minus for the story. But the audio was decent. The story and character mannerisms and stuff, it was fun. Uh, Depends on your definition of fun. I mean, it was okay. A fun movie to me is like Transformers, action packed. Not that this wasn't action packed. It was just, I guess, the character mannerisms and what they did in the dialogue kind of took away from the fun time that I had with this movie. So it was C minus, 2.5 stars is what we'll give it. Howard Wang, good evening, sir. What time is it there? You're probably 14 hours ahead of me, depending on where you are in Asia. You could be further than that. Be interested to know what time it is there. It is definitely evening. So watch that. I need to watch some other movies today. Hopefully we'll get in there. I tried to adjust or fix a rattle, and I'm gonna try and see if I can actually fix this. It's my door. And there's so much low energy in the Mad VR Experience Center that this door seats pretty tight, but it's still getting shaken. So I've got to see if I can adjust it. There are adjustments. I just need to see if I can get it tighter. It's tight, but it needs to be really tight, hopefully, and see if we can get it to stop moving. It's the only rattle that I can really hear. There may be one other one on that side of the room, maybe. I've got to see if I can go find it. This one is the most apparent. It's where you hear it and you're like, look immediately at it. So I've got to see if I can address that. But it is, I thought it was the wall. It is definitely the door. And that door is substantial. And the low energy that's in that room, she's just shaken. It's a custom made portal door. It's, I want to say, like 5 pieces of sandwiched material, like metal, wood, metal, wood, metal. and then it has multiple um, latches that come out, and then when it hooks in, when it closes, there's hooks that drop that pull it shut. So there's just a little bit of movement, and there's enough energy in the room that it's moving it. So it's a custom made door by Officina. She's a big one. I mean, she weighs over 200 pounds. It's just getting moved. It's a lot of energy. I mean, we're flat down to 5 hertz, like 115 dB. There's a lot of power in that room. So she gets moved. And it doesn't happen all the time. It's only in scenes, as an example. And this is why I kind of went back to this week, is because over the weekend at DL Beck's, it's got a great theater. We watched A Quiet Place because Jonathan had never seen it. A lot of the guys had actually never seen it. So we watched A Quiet Place, and there's a scene after she steps on the nail and she's hiding in the basement from the monsters that comes down the stairs. When it's hitting, like right before it comes down the stairs, there's a huge low frequency energy burst that comes out. And that noise shakes the door. Then when she goes upstairs into the bathroom and she gets in the tub and the monster's coming up the stairs, there's those same noises as they come up the stairs. And I can hear the door, and it's distracting. And honestly, if I'm watching a movie and that happens and I didn't know it was coming, I'm immediately taken back into the movie, but I want to fix it because there's so little rattles in that room. I mean, there's other ones, like if I watch uh, what's the movie? Interstellar, Into the Wormhole, or the rocket launch and stuff. There are other rattles, but they're masked by the sound in the room. And some of those, it's going to be really difficult for me to chase. Like one's the screen. I probably will chase them eventually. But this one, it occurs when there's very little noise going on in the room. There's no other SPL at any other frequencies, really. It's just that. So it's really easy to hear. So I've got to try and address it. So we're going to try and address that. Maybe I'll look at it today. I've got some time. And then we go out of town. We go to Disney next week. Or this weekend, I should say. Come back Wednesday. So not really going to have time next week, but maybe I can make some headway on it today. Maurizio, one of the guys behind Officina, gave me some ideas on how to adjust the door. So I'm going to go over there and fly by the seat of my pants and see if I can get it adjusted. So we'll do that. I keep buying movies and I keep not watching them. So I got some other movies I need to watch. But let's jump into the top. If you guys have any questions about AV and home theater or 2-channel or any of that stuff, feel free to drop them in chat just like Glockster Guy did. I will get to them after we get to our topic. So our topic today is Audiophile versus Pro. And this came up a good part of it. And I'm not picking on anybody. I think this is a general issue in the industry. I think this is an industry issue because I don't think people really understand the problem and what issues this can create. And I actually recorded an AVS podcast yesterday with Eric Wesley from AVS Forum and Jeffrey Heinzel on speaker design. And it really wasn't necessarily the nitty gritties of like, how are you drawing out a speaker? It was things that you have to consider when you're doing, and the limitations and different things like that you can run into when doing a speaker. We actually talked a lot about driver limitations, and that's where this comes from. So a lot of audiophile speakers are using drivers that are not meant for high SPL. You're using silk dome tweeters. You're using ribbons, which ribbons can do a lot of output, but depending on the voice coils and stuff, they may fall short. So that is more of a depends. But we'll focus more on soft dome tweeters. And people use these, and they can be from tons of different types of materials. I mean, you can have aluminum, titanium, beryllium, all of these different materials, and they can still create issues. So the material isn't necessarily a get out of jail free card because the material is only part of the issue. The voice coil and the cabinet, a bunch of other things are also a big part of this problem. And what ends up happening, and we saw this in Iowa, and I think this is endemic of people when they do demos, is they will turn their systems up. And there are some systems where you can continually turn up, like Jonathan and myself. So they're designed to do these ridiculous amounts of SPL because the tool that was chosen was chosen to get or be utilized for a specific use case, right? The JBL 70J1s that Jonathan chose are designed to hit very high SPLs because they're designed to throw sound a very far way. And because of that, at 1 meter, they have to be able to do a lot of output, and they have arrays of soft dome tweeters. So they're still soft domes, but they've got arrays, and you can get more by arraying things and putting them together. So you can create more output, right? You're increasing surface area. Um, For me, I chose compression drivers, and they too can get to ridiculous levels of output without distorting. So we can do, and this doesn't mean a system is bad. It's just a different use case, right? That's what this comes down to. You've got to use a tool to accomplish a job instead of using, I'm not going to use a pair of scissors as a hammer. That's a bad tool for that job. And it's the same thing with speakers. You've got to use the correct tool to accomplish a certain job. That's how this works. It's not appropriate to use the wrong tool to do every job. It's not going to work. There's going to be times where you're going to fall flat and you're going to have issues. The thing that I see with the industry is a lot of people don't recognize these issues. I have been in arguments, not really arguments, but tissels. I don't even think that's a word, or I'm not describing it correctly. It's come up about Kef, and I'm not picking on Kef. It just comes up a lot about Kef because their UniQ driver. And people say, well, I can have a reference level experience with Kef in my room. And I say, no, you're not. You may get to that SPL level, right? But it's not going to be a great experience. And it may be a great experience to what you've experienced, right? Your own experience, because the majority, and again, I am not talking down on people. I am not picking on people. I'm simply saying from my experience, the positions that people get themselves into is people have these ideas based on their own experiences that, oh, I'm hitting 105 dB peak, so I'm doing reference. And while you're hitting the SPL, you are having huge amounts of distortion. And if you're using something like a Kef or like a Martin Logan or a Polk or really any of these traditional speakers, you are inducing so much distortion. And this does not mean they're bad speakers. I'm going to emphasize this many times. It does not mean they're bad speakers. It is a tool designed for a different purpose. And that is very important to remember, that I am not talking badly about any of these brands. It is a tool that should be used for a different purpose, and they will excel at that purpose. You just want to make sure that you use the right tool if this is what you're going to do. And so I post in these threads and I say, it's really because people will just start, OP will say, well, I'm looking for a new speaker. What do you guys recommend? Right? That's the general consensus of what happens. Well, I'm looking for something new. I've got the upgrade itch. They don't really give you any type of, sometimes they do, but dimensions. They don't give you any type of SPL habits, like how loudly they listen. They don't tell you, do you have dedicated subwoofers? How hot do you push them? What's your crossover typically? They don't tell you the throw distance. And those are all things that you really need in order to recommend the correct tool, the correct speaker. What type of content is this, music or home theater? Because the bass will vary significantly. And people will then start making recommendations. And they'll make recommendations based on what they've used and what they've liked. And there's nothing wrong with that, with the exception of we don't know how this particular tool is going to be used, what that tool is trying to be used to accomplish. So making these recommendations blindly helps no one. You can actually push people into the same position that they were before. Maybe they're noticing distortion. You're making these recommendations, and while it sounds good at moderate levels, which is probably what that speaker was designed for, if it's a traditional audiophile speaker, and I'm using that term broadly, it's probably going to have the same issue. It may encounter that issue a little bit sooner or a little bit later, but most of them are going to encounter that. So it's really important when you ask for, hey, what speaker should I get, to also say, what am I using it for? What is my room like? What are my expectations that this is going to deliver? So I think it's really important that people get the whole picture, because these speakers are designed for a totally different purpose. And I speak from experience. And again, I am not picking on these brands. I think they are great at what they do. But let's use Martin Logan. Martin Logan speakers are not designed for huge amounts of SPL. They're not. That's not their use case. And if you ask them, hey, I'm playing back at this SPL, they'll say, wait, that's way too loud. So I had a Martin Logan theater, and I would try and keep up with Jonathan Arkea, who could play at reference with very little, if any, distortion. Well, there's going to be levels of distortion, regardless. Mine has it, his has it. So I can't say there's none, but very low levels of distortion, and your ears would not fatigue. And I would do it, and I thought it was great. But having what I have now in the Mad VR Experience Center, it's very different. Very different. And that's because the speakers were encountering more and more distortion. So they could do it without blowing up, but you're encountering high levels. I mean, 50, 75, 100% distortion up when you're trying to output at those regions. So that's a big part of this. But let's talk about the spec. So if you look at the spec of speakers, and Jeffrey and I and Eric talked about this yesterday, a big one that gets people is, well, this speaker says in the spec that I can do 110 dB, right? That's its maximum output. And people, a lot of times will take that as, well, reference, THX reference, which is a reference. It is a suggestion for what I think a room should be able to do. Not that that's what the content's mastered at. It's just, this is what we believe your room should be able to do if you want to have a very high output capable system. Like, oh, well, 110 is higher than 105, so it can do it. But they fail to realize, because it's not written in a lot of these specs, that 110 dB is typically measured at 1 meter. And it does not mean, this is the other important part that people don't quite grasp, the thing that I just said, but this is the one that most people don't grasp, is that number, that SPL, typically is not representative of the entire frequency. There's different ways to measure it. Sometimes it can be an average. Sometimes it can be the actual maximum peak that speaker is going to be able to do at any frequency. But it typically, and this is including pro brands, does not mean that speaker is able to do that amount of SPL at every frequency. Right? So I'm not just going to pick on audiophile brands. Let's look at Ascendo. And I want to showcase this point. And I'm going to try and find their speaker graph. And I think Ascendo would be fine with me showing this, because I think it's just important for people to understand, because and they provide their spec. They provide all of their measurements. So I'm going to share this here in just a second. All right. So let's find a speakers. And let's just do, where's the 10? I want to find the 10. The 10 passive on wall. Okay. So now let's find, so in the spec, and I'm gonna share this. Windows, this. Let's get rid of that. This one, share. All right. So this is the Ascendo, the 10. In their spec, they say 120 dB continuous, 130 dB peak. They also say 120 dB at 100 hertz, 130 dB at 150 hertz. Very few manufacturers are even going to give you this. They'll give you like this, what I highlighted, 120 dB. That's the SPL. That's all they'll give you. They won't give you anything else. They won't tell you peak. They won't tell you continuous. They won't tell you at specific frequencies. And I'm not trying to say that Ascendo is better. I'm simply saying that this is the type of information that we need to be pushing for, because this is the type of information that you need to be able to properly implement a tool or use a tool to accomplish a task. If you don't know how to use the tool, right? If it's a little bit complicated to use or something, and you don't know how to properly use it, and you don't know what its limitations are, if you're pushing to the limit, how can you expect the best possible outcome? You can't, because you don't know how to best interact with said tool, which is being used to get to that goal. So now if we look at the measurements, remember we've got 120 dB typically continuous, and then 130 dB peak in a lot of these situations. And then if we look at the measurement report and look at the 2010, the CEA 2010 information, which is somewhere here. All right, so here is the CEA 2010B. This shows you the output, and you can see exactly what they're talking about. So at 150 hertz, right here, 130 dB. That's what they're talking about. But if you took that 120 dB, right, and Ascendo is a little bit more transparent than most, you will see that it says 120 continuous right here. But if you try and do that and you're trying to set a really low crossover or something, look what happens. It's not doing 120 down here. It slopes off. As Jeffrey would say, it sags. This is the natural tendency of the speaker. This is its limitations. You cannot give this speaker more power to equal this. This is where it's compressing. This is where you're going to run into issues. And again, Ascendo is giving you more than most other brands are going to give you. Trying to think if I've know of any other CEA 2010B data that's going to be available that we can really look at this. And unfortunately, there's not. So I can't. And the reason there's not a lot of times is because people don't want to measure this type of information. Take Aaron, and I'm not. Aaron does this for a reason because he doesn't want the speaker to blow up. Because if I'm showing the limits of a speaker when it's compressing, and this is why Aaron uses a different way to show compression, is because he doesn't want to be responsible for the speaker exploding, failing, burning up, lighting on fire, all that kind of stuff. If you do this and you're pushing to these ragged limits when things are compressing for sustained amounts of time, there is a potential likelihood that things are going to go pop. So that's why he doesn't do it. And that's why he shows the compression in the way that he shows. I'm not picking. I think it's great that he's found a way to be able to showcase that. So that's not me picking on him. I'm explaining why he does that. So if people want to provide the speakers and say, yeah, I want to know the compression limits, I want a full CEA 2010, he can show that. He just doesn't because he doesn't want to be responsible for the hardware, which I totally understand. I get it. I wouldn't want to do that either. But I think it's really important that people understand this and that you need to have all of this information. And this is why the clippable information is so important, to be able to find tools that will work in your use case. Now, it's also very important. I'm really passionate about this topic, which is why I'm rambling about it. It's also very important that you go listen to this stuff. Because just because a speaker measures X, Y, or Z way does not mean that you're going to like the way it sounds. And we even talked about this yesterday in our recording of the podcast, which I believe airs today. So if you enjoy watching the AVS podcast, I would encourage you. It's available on Spotify, on Apple Music, I think, and it's available on YouTube, and you can get to it directly from AVS. Eric will post it when he's done editing it. But I think it's a good listen because Jeffrey is very direct and he's very passionate and he will not sugarcoat anything. If he thinks something a certain way, he's going to tell you. And you could tell yesterday when he was talking that he was trying to be nice. So I appreciated him being political about some stuff. But I really love Jeffrey for the reason that he is very smart. He's been doing this for a long time and he will not pull any punches. So if you want to know more about this topic and get into it, I would encourage you to listen to that. We went for about 2 hours, I think, about this topic, and we talked about driver selection, limitations of different tweeters and woofers and why they're limited. I learned a lot from this conversation. We talked a bit about cabinet design and subwoofers and how that could limit things and ports. And then we talked about crossovers a bit, passive crossovers, and the things that they can do and the limitations that they can put on and why they're limited or have limitations in comparison to active crossovers. So it's an interesting listen. Is it The most formal? No, because we like to just have casual conversations during this stuff. But if you want to know more, I would absolutely encourage you to listen to that for sure. So Paul Travasino says Audioholics said they don't do compression tests at all because they don't want to blow up speakers. Maybe they should ask the yeah, this is an absolute great reason. And I totally understand why they don't do it. Why Audioholics doesn't do it. I'm not saying a reviewer should do it. I am saying the company should do it. And the CEDIA recommended practices that are coming are going to push manufacturers to do this, which I am all for. Because, again, I have said this numerous times, if you do not have all of the information, how can you properly utilize a tool? You can't. It's not possible. And if you can't do that, you're leaving a lot of your experience on the table. You may get lucky and you're able to do a lot of it, but you're leaving, in high likelihood, a lot of that on the table. So I really want companies to do it more. Paul Travasino says per listen gives some good output specs. They do. They do. I wish they would provide clippable data, but they do. They do way more than most. So I'm all for them. They do a great job of being transparent. And you're able to look at that and go, I know the limits of this speaker. And that's okay. And if you talk to them, if you talk to Lars or you talk to Eric, they will tell you the limits of their speaker. If you say, hey, I need this amount of SPL from this distance, like if my throw distance is this far, and I've actually talked to them about this because I've been in some big rooms and the customer wanted per listen. And I said, I don't know if that's going to work. And I talked to Eric in this given situation. He said, you're really right on the edge with this. And you would either need to do this or that's not a good fit. So they are. And if you find the right designers and the guys that are really passionate about this stuff, they'll tell you because they want you to have a good experience. So per listen, all for it. Paul also says it's sad more companies don't do this. Ascendo is great for this. You can get more specs on the screw holding the speaker to the wall than the speaker itself. Yeah, sometimes from some companies you absolutely can. It's unfortunate. Kind of makes you wonder what's being hidden. Majik says if a tweeter is rated at 95 dB at 1 watt, 1 meter, max power 100 watts, can it produce reference at 8 feet away? So you'd have to know distortion. You would have to know what it's doing for compression. With those limits, potentially, but the other part that we talked about during the recording yesterday was that power is not uniform across every frequency. That's usually the maximum limit for the woofers that they're going to be able to handle. Because if you threw 200 watts into a small tweeter, it would immediately explode in a lot of cases. So that power is not linear across the curve. It changes depending on the frequency. So it's hard to tell. You could very well have high frequency compression while the woofers are able to do things. An easy way to do it is there's some calculators. This is anechoic, what I'm about to tell you, so take it with a grain of salt. But you can take the sensitivity of the speaker, and then for every doubling of distance from the speaker to the main listening position, you lose 6 dB. So at 1 watt, you're at 95 at 1 meter. At 2 meters, 6 feet, you would be 6 dB down or 89. And then at 4 meters, well, you're at 3 meters, so we'll do 3 dB instead of 6. You would be at 86. And then for every doubling of power, remember this is anechoic, every doubling of power, you're going to gain 3 dB. And this gets out of control exponentially fast. So you're at 86 at 1 watt. At 2 watts, you're at 89. At 4 watts, you're at 92. At 8 watts, you're at 95. At 16 watts, you're at 98. At 32 watts, you're at 101. At 64 watts, you're at 104. At 128 watts, you're at 107. And at 256 watts, you're at 110. Now, I think because this is a soft dome, you're going to encounter compression way before that. And it's also important when you look at specs to take them with a grain of salt if they don't give you any context, because you don't know how those measurements were taken. You don't know what they mean by 200 watts max power. What does that mean? Does that mean the maximum recommended amplifier size? Is what power or what frequency is that 200 watt max at? How much distortion is that at? Right? Because the compression plot, if you look at Ascendos, Jeffrey said that when they cap off and they say this is the maximum that this speaker is able to do at X frequency, 130 dB at 150 hertz, he said that their limit there, when they say that's enough, is 3% distortion. That's when they cap it off. And a lot of speakers are going to bring in a lot more than that. That's where they cap it off. So you've got to figure out what amount of distortion as well are they saying this is the limit. And without that information, you don't know how or what that particular amount of information means. Would you trust, if you were trying to figure out a medication, and this is an extreme example, but figure out a medication without having this information? Like they'll say, oh, this was tested this way. Would you really trust it as much if you weren't given any of the information of how that test was conducted versus somebody that gave you all of the information about how the test was conducted and how the results were gotten to? I would trust the how a lot more than just the one with that's a blank slate or with a gray area with all of that information missing. So if you can get the information, all the better. In a vacuum, if we assume that all of these measurements are in the good graces of the consumer, theoretically it should be able to do THX reference. Now, the other part of that to consider, Majek, is that does not account for EQ. And remember, this is anechoic. You're going to get room gain. You can get things from SBIR. You may be more than that. But I think it's important to understand, to look at everything. And one is this does not include EQ. So if you've put in a PEQ or auto EQ or room EQ has put in a boost at a certain frequency, you may encounter compression at that frequency because you're going over the limits of what that speaker is able to do. So there's that. The other part of it is you don't want to be on the fringes of what a speaker is capable of. So I don't want to be, if I'm listening to something really loud, if I'm at reference and I'm continually encountering these peaks, while I'm only momentarily potentially encountering these large amounts of SPL, you are incurring heat into the voice coil, into the materials, into all of this stuff, because that's the byproduct of movement and energy. That's the primary thing that gets in people in trouble is heat as things heat up. And you're incurring more and more of that, and you're going to incur more and more distortion as things go on for longer and longer periods of time. So if there's a very different level of experience between a speaker just cruising when it's not on anywhere near the ragged limit and one that is constantly on the ragged limit, right? I would much rather have a speaker that is capable of much more than that, that is not trying, that is designed to handle if I'm chasing high SPL, if I'm chasing reference. I would want this. A speaker that is able to handle that without breaking a sweat. Because if I am breaking the sweat all the time, I'm probably dealing with a lot higher levels of distortion. I'm pushing on the ragged edge and I am dealing with more heat. I am potentially inducing and creating more of a potential for something to fail because I'm pushing something to its limit. While it may be able to do it, it doesn't mean that it's going to be able to do it continuously for a long period of time. So I wouldn't want to do that. But again, to reinforce this, that does not mean that this is a bad speaker. I have never heard this speaker, but it does not mean that it is a bad speaker. It may have been designed for a totally different use case. And that's important to realize, that just because X, Y, or Z is not capable of doing something does not mean it's bad. If you use a car analogy, right? A pickup truck is probably not the greatest thing on a racetrack. A sports car is, but a sports car is terrible at what a pickup truck is able to offer. So you got to use something for what it's designed to be used for. And as long as you do that, you're going to have a good time. JBL has been pretty good about providing specs over the years. I'd like to see max SPL be a standard. I agree. But I think JBL has historically done it and they do it on their pro stuff. They're not as good about doing it on their residential stuff. But JBL does it on their pro stuff specifically because if they don't, the pro guys won't use it. And I think that's a big difference between the pro scene and the consumer scene. Is the pro guys, the reputation's on the line. They need to know, because this is for potentially somebody else in a commercial environment, that this is going to do what I'm asking it to do. And it's going to do it without a problem for a long time. And so they need to know what to do it. So if you go ask somebody, hey, in the pro scene, if I go ask QSC or I go ask Electro Voice or I go ask JBL or I go ask L Acoustics and I say, I need the specs on your speakers so I know how to properly implement them into a church or whatever, you're going to get handed a book about this information. If I go ask the majority of consumer companies this, I'm going to get handed a one sheet, one pager, and it's going to list the specs with the weight, and you're going to get some maximum SPL. And it's very different. So we are hoping that we can get to where we're on the pro side. And it's also, I've reinforced this, is important to recognize that speakers are not designed for every purpose. But I said this at the beginning, it is also very important to recognize that listening to them is just as important as the objectivity of reading a graph, because they are going to sound different due to a multitude of factors. So it's very important to not only look at the objective data, but also plant your butt and be able to listen to this stuff, because you may find that a speaker measures amazingly, but in your room, if you also don't take into account your room and you also don't take into account your ears, you may not like it, because the room is going to interact with how that speaker is throwing sound with its dispersion, its sound power, its all different kinds of stuff. And if you don't take that into account, you're potentially in for a bad time, or maybe not a bad time, but leaving a lot of potential on the table. So things to consider. Drew Arredondo says, every time I listen to Jeffrey, I realize I really don't know anything. To me, that's always a good feeling. It is always best, I think, to not be or think you are the smartest person in the room. It is a great place to be because you always have the potential to learn. And I think once you encounter any point in any hobby or any profession, a point where you feel like there's nothing left to learn, you might as well quit. I think there's always things to learn. There's always things to do differently. We're always learning new things. We're always discovering new things that we may have thought, oh, this is objectively how this thing behaves in the past. And then we find out in the future, because we've devised a different way to measure, or we've learned, or all of this stuff, that, oh, that wasn't true. So as I believe, you should always be on this constant pathway to learning. And Jeffrey is a great resource for that. He has done it for so long, and he's not the only one about that. Eric and Lars from Perlisten are also phenomenal resources. John Heron from Chernoff, Matt Trinkline, and Gary Blouse from Storm. Those guys have been in this scene. Adam Peltz. They've been doing this for a long time, and they are wealths of information. But if you talk to any of them, they will all say, I don't know everything. I'm learning. I'm changing. If you talk to the calibrators, a lot of them will say, man, if I listen to one of my calibrations from X, Y, or Z time ago, and I think that it's just as good as it is mine are now, I haven't been improving my craft. You should always be, in my opinion, on a pathway to constant improvement. And that's great. That is a great place to be. I encourage everybody to do that. So that's a great comment, Drew. I appreciate that. Have I heard the new Perlisten A series? I have not. I'd like to. I have not heard them. I'm sure they're great. A lot of the Perlisten stuff is very similarly voiced. It comes more down to how much power it can handle, and thereby how much SPL it can throw X distance. I mean, it does come down to frequency, but to me, looking at like their R and S series, that's been the major disseminator between the two. So I would assume that's a big difference between the A, the R, and the S. But I would be interested in hearing them. Hopefully, we can get per listen to M-Wave because that would be great to be able to show. I think the A series would be great to be able to showcase it M-Wave. So I need to call Eric and see if we can get them out because that would be good. I'm always excited to have more choices. I think that is great. Oddly, I have the JBL 830 8320s as my surrounds. Me and Jonathan went over everything, and even as I soft dome tweeter, everything reference capable. Yeah, so I do soft domes. It's not that they're not reference capable. It very much depends on the distance. So as surrounds, soft domes are much more applicable than LCRs. Sustained is not nearly as much of a problem. It's not going to be primary amounts of content, so you're not as much worried about distortion. It's not that they can't do it, it's that you need to recognize their limits. It's like at 1 meter. I picked on that KEF earlier, and that KEF was, if I remember right, 110 dB was their maximum output. So at that frequency, at 1 meter, it's absolutely able to do the recommended levels for THX reference. It can. And if you double that distance, you're right on the fringes. So that's at 6 feet, 2 meters. So as long as you're within the bounds of what that speaker is able to do, and also considering room gain, because room gain is absolutely part of it, you may be able to do it with a soft dome tweeter for sure. But you've got to make sure that you're within the bounds of what that particular piece of equipment is capable of. And as I said before, it's also important to be not on the ragged edge. Because if you're on the ragged edge, whether you recognize it or not, you're probably inducing a lot more distortion. And if you go to somebody's system that is not on the ragged edge, that is capable of way more than that, you may recognize it. It's always one of those situations of ignorance is bliss. Or you're just ignorant. It's okay to be ignorant. It's just that a lot of people don't know. And then once you know, you know. That does not mean that it's a bad speaker. It's just, it's hard to hear. A great example of this is in the Iowa tour, there were a lot of JVCs. They had great black floors. I came home and turned on the Christie, and my blacks looked not great. And I adjusted, my eyes adjusted, and they got better. But having that reference wasn't great. So once you establish the reference, and my brain was like, oh, yeah, look at that black. And this is what I was used to over the weekend. And now look at this. It's the same kind of thing. But as long as you're using it within the bounds of what the limits are for that equipment and what your expectations are, I think that's great. Yeah, THX reference is 85 dB average and 105 dB peak. But it's important to recognize that this is not a standard, right? This is a recommendation. Everybody, the studio mastering houses are not necessarily mastering at that, though they can. And it does not necessarily mean that that's what the peak is going to be in your system. It's just what I would recommend the system be capable of in order for you to have a good time, right? That's why I use that is, hey, let's try and design a system that can do this. And ideally, you would design a system that can do over that so you can account with EQ and so on without getting into distortion. Um, Happy bullets. I feel like the smartest person in the room when I'm alone. That's fair. I feel really dumb when I'm alone in a lot of situations because I look at things like, man, I got to teach myself this. And you recognize your limitations when you don't have other people to lean on. And, um, but that's funny. I'm the smartest person in the room when I'm alone. Yeah, that's fair. If I'm in with my dog may be smarter than me, though. All right. So there were a couple questions that I start here. So we'll go back. Glockster says, if time and distance are the same thing, can you adjust in the AVR the distance from what Odyssey set it at to get your MLP out of a null if you can't move the speakers or MLP? Potentially. It depends on the reason for that null existing. That null may not change. It may be a byproduct of your room. But yeah, you can. It's also important to recognize that phase can change at different frequencies and can change um, for a multitude of different reasons. So just because you're changing the time of the speaker does not necessarily mean you're going to fix a phase issue at every frequency, because it's not linear. It can change and be different for different reasons at different frequencies, especially when you start applying filters and crossovers and all that. So doing phase adjustments using all pass filters can be very important. And there's things that you have to do with them to get a correct and flat phase that you're not going to be able to do just with time adjustment. But time, as you're saying, can absolutely make a difference. For sure. That would be something that I would absolutely look at to try and address a null. But I can't promise that it's going to fix that null, because that just may be a symptom or a byproduct of your room, unfortunately. But for sure, look into that. Glockster then says, what about just leaving your door cracked and not all the way closed? Maybe, though then light comes in and that kind of defeats the pressurization and it allows sound to leak. So I'd rather fix it, but I understand your suggestion um, to get rid of that noise. Unfortunately, though, there's enough low frequency energy in the Mad VR Experience Center that may not matter. It may rattle the door anyway, but I'll try it. That's a good suggestion for trying today. I'll try that today. C3 Ryan, Orion, I'm assuming that's what it is. I have a turn off altitude with 4 per listen D3i subs. What's the best practice for DSP? Should I add 6 dB input boost at the sub amps or let the turn off handle all EQ and level adjustments? That depends on if you're inducing clipping. I like to start with my amps at like the 12 o'clock position and see where they measure. If your gain is too low, the turn-off should not have an issue with this, because the turn-off should have more than enough voltage to be able to overcome it. But on more consumer-based products, you can run into issues where if this amp gain is too low, the AVR or preamp may not have enough output voltage to be able to get to the volume at X frequency that it's trying to get to. You may clip. And the other can be true. If the gain on the amp is too high and the voltage comes in, you may induce clipping from the amp. So it's important to find the happy medium, the balance between them. So I don't know. You could try it. I don't know what you're trying to fix. Really what you're trying to do is make sure you have enough headroom, because you can typically cut very easily to a point. I mean, once you hit 0, there's no going any further, but you can typically cut much more than you can boost. So you got to find the happy medium that allows you enough headroom to boost to the levels that you're trying to. Remember, you don't want to boost out of nulls and things like that, but you just got to find the happy place where everything's happiest and you're not encountering any type of clipping. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Some of the stuff I say can come out as clear as mud. So Thibault says, love so much Eric's works. I've 10 D215s. Dang. That's a lot. So we moved a lot of those at, when was that? Cedia in 24. We had to move a lot of those D215s. Oh, we had to put them up on shelves because we were doing waveforming. That was not fun at all, because they're heavy and they're big, and that was bad. So you have 10 of them. That's a lot. That is a lot. Power to you. That's fantastic. Good for you. But any other questions before we hang it up for today? And I love all your guys' comments in the video. I try and get back to each and every one of them at least once. It sometimes can take me a day or two to reply, but I do try and get back to the comments, and I do enjoy reading them. You guys have some great insight, and I'm always appreciative to hear when you guys disagree or think that I'm wrong or any of that stuff, because it's discussions like that, as long as you're open-minded about it, can be very important.
and are a very important part of the learning process, because you have to recognize you can't know everything. And looking at something from somebody else's point of view may provide a better lens into what's going on. Like, the one that's had a lot of discussion has been movies, like why certain people like movies and certain people don't. And I learned something about Rotten Tomatoes. I didn't know that it was more of a, 90%. If the movie has a 90%, it's 90% put it positively, which is very misleading. But I didn't know that that's what that meant. And so that was a learning opportunity for me. So I think that that's great. Did I watch the Temu Jurassic Park? No. I'm going to watch that today. So in our previous stream, if you guys remember, I had mentioned that people need to get away from what's comfortable, like Jurassic Park. They need to try and find something that's different. You can do a dinosaur movie, but do it differently. And Bruce found me what he's calling the Temu Jurassic Park. It is not Jurassic Park. It is something else. And it has a 2.5 on IMDb. But frankly, I kind of love those movies when I know they're bad and the movie knows it's bad. So I hope this movie knows it's bad, because they can be fun. They're bad movies, no doubt about it, but they can be fun. Like, I love Battlefield Earth. It is a terrible movie, but it's a fun movie. And I think it knows it's a terrible movie. So that kind of stuff is fantastic. I really appreciate it. But I'm going to try and watch that today while I'm working, Bruce. Thank you for reminding me, because I would have forgotten. Color says, I have 2 JTR RS1 subs, and I want 2 more for my new theater room. Should I get 2 more RS1 subs, or should I try some 21 subs like PSA? Ideally, you would do the same sub. The same sub should, if it's using the same driver and the same amp, behave the same. It's going to solve a lot of phase issues, because if you start changing subs, drivers, amplifiers, you can, unbeknownst to you, open a whole can of worms in the time domain. And with sealed to sealed, it's a lot easier to potentially fix, but you can potentially avoid a lot of that by just using the same subs. So I would do more RS1s instead of the 21s, unless there's specifically something that you're trying to overcome that the RS1s are not delivering. You could theoretically use like a 21 as a near field, and it's not going to be as much of a problem because the volume's going to be turned down super low. But if I were in your position, I would try and use RS1s or RS2s that are going to be very similarly phase-wise, time-wise, to limit the type of issues that I may run into. You can do what you're asking, and it can work without addressing the phase, but it is something else that you will have to do, ideally, if you want an ideal best case setup. Just things to think about. The iPal is a great sub, and it's a great amplifier. So not talking bad about that, but I would do the RS1s. They're smaller, and as long as it's doing what you want it to do, that's what I would do for sure. Any suggestions before I wrap up on topics? 2 behind the screen and 2 in front. I would just do RS1s or RS2s. That would be my suggestion, depending on the room size. I guess I should ask that. How big is the room? Because that can be a thing. Look at the compression data onto and see where they're compressing and how much you're actually gaining, and if that's worth it, and if that's in a region that you feel like it's lacking, or if you're even trying to go to those levels. Something to consider too. So C3 Ryan says, thanks a lot. No real issue. Would just prefer a little bit more umph in the chest. I'm already boosting the lows with the target curve by 10 dB. What did he say before? I got to go back and see his comment, because I've already forgotten. Where was his comment? I can't find it. Where is it? There it is. Turn off subs. What's the best price? Oh, okay. So you're using it to boost. I get it. Makes sense. That's fair. Topic ANSI contrast. So like interesting. Yeah, maybe. We may need to talk about something broader than that. But that's a good suggestion. Maybe we need to talk about video. Thibault says, because he's the guy with the 10D 215s, I may need to add 232s. You are a man on a mission. You are a man on a mission. 27 by 13 by 8. Kelderek says with those RS1s. That's a big room. I think I'd still do the RS1s or RS2s instead of the iPal. I think. It's going to blend better. They'll be able to dig further. That's my suggestion. They'll talk about ANSI now. It's not the moment. Don't distract me. All right, so we'll wrap up here. I got to go watch Temu Jurassic Park. Black Friday sales. Yeah, we could probably do that next week. Let me schedule a stream for Wednesday night. In order to do that, though, I'm going to need your guys' help. I need you to comment on sales that you see because I can't find all of them. So I think it's important if you guys see a noteworthy sale, comment on this video that you found a sale and I will add it to the spreadsheet and we can have that for Black Friday. And I'm going to schedule the next stream for Wednesday night. That'll work. And we can talk about Black Friday and sales and, you know, what I think may be a best buy situation. You guys can ask, should I get this? Should I not? Because I know Den and Marantz are going to have sales. They're already running. JVC's got some stuff. Martin Logan's got stuff. SVS has got stuff. So there's sales. I'm just not going to be able to find all of them. So if you know of a sale, post it in this video's comments. I'll add it to the spreadsheet. And then that way, when we talk on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, we can do this again. And I'll probably do another one on Friday morning. And we can add to that. That's probably the best thing to do. Or maybe we just do the stream on Friday morning. Why don't we do it on Friday morning? Because that's probably better. Because if there's a true Black Friday ad that hadn't come out until after Thanksgiving came out on Friday, let's do it on Friday. Because I'll be getting back Wednesday afternoon. Probably won't want to stream, honestly. Let's do it on Friday. So if you guys know of any sales, post them in the comments of this video, not in chat, in the comments when we close up. And I will get them added and we can talk about them next Friday. If you have any other topics that you'd like addressed, interesting, it's a good one. We can schedule some videos accordingly. But the next one will be about Black Friday and what maybe to get. So if you guys have questions, should I buy this? Should I not? I'm happy to tell you. We're going to wrap it up for now. If you guys need anything else, feel free to reach out. Here's my contact info. You can just scan this QR code if you have any questions about anything, need to buy anything. I'm a dealer for many brands, and I try and do the best and offer the best price and performance and recommendations that I can for all of my customers. I frankly just try to act and do things how I would want to be treated. So if you guys need anything, have any questions, even if you're not buying anything, do not hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help you. And if I don't know the answer, I can push you in a direction of somebody that may, or I will reach out to them directly. I've been fortunate enough to know a lot of people in this industry, and it's nice to be able to lean on people that are much smarter than me in certain avenues, most avenues, virtually all avenues, because I am not the smartest person in the room ever. I like being that way. So anyway, guys, enjoy your home theater journeys. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Enjoy the holiday. And I will see you next Friday to talk about Black Friday deals. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a good one. See you later.